In 1956, the movie Lust for Life was released. That biography of Vincent Van Gogh, more than anything else, etched into history the suicide in the Wheatfield version of how he died. It starred Kirk Douglas as the troubled artist, troubled in so many ways, bedeviled by hallucinations, depressed, probably alcoholic, suffering from that curse of the 19th century, syphilis. A lonely figure to be avoided or mocked. But in the spring of 1890, at age 37, he found a place he thought would bring him peace, the French village of Auvers, where he would die just 70 days after his arrival. The authors of the new Van Gogh biography maintain the circumstances of his death were far different from the movie version. Auvers was just a half-hour train ride from Paris, a quiet, bucolic farming town on the banks of the river Oise. The area was a magnet for painters like Cézanne, Pissarro, and Corot, giants of modern art.
This was not only a place where the best artists of the era came to paint because it was so beautiful. For somewhat similar reasons, the wealthy of Paris would come in summer here. It was sort of the Hamptons of the 1890s.
The smart set.
Smart set came here.
Inspired by his surroundings, Van Gogh painted like a man possessed, turning out a picture a day. He painted the medieval church on the hill, looking as though it's about to jump off the canvas. He painted the town hall, decked out for Bastille Day. And just across the street, the Auberge Ravoux, the inn where he lived and took his meals. He ate here every day.
He did eat here every day. His only social interaction during the day was in ordering food, which is really incredibly sad.
In this picture, taken outside the inn the year Vincent died, Gustave Ravoux, the owner, sits at the left. His teenage daughter, Adeline, stands in the doorway. Key figures in the story of what happened on Sunday, July 27th, 1890. On that day, like most other days, Vincent left the cafe carrying his easel, some canvases, and his paint box, ready to begin yet another day of feverish work. And just as the sun was setting, he returned to the cafe, staggering, clutching his stomach, clearly in great pain. Was his injury the result of a botched suicide attempt, as the official history maintains, or had something else happened? The Lust for Life version, with Douglas at his teeth-gnashing best, draws on a story that Adeline Ravoux told many years later, that Vincent had been bothered by crows as he painted and borrowed a gun from her father to keep them away. But
he loved birds. The idea that he would feel a need to scare away crows just never made any sense.
Did he have suicide in mind? The painting in the film does seem to carry a dark prophecy, the crows, harbingers of death. For years, that painting, Wheatfield with Crows, was thought to be Vincent's last work, his own visual epitaph. But
in fact, it seems to have been painted about July 10th, which is more than 2 weeks before he died, and he painted a lot of very happy paintings after that.
In many of his letters, Van Gogh did write of considering suicide, but always rejected it, concluding that such an act would be both sinful and immoral. What we only know for sure is that a gun was present on that day, and Vincent was shot. The gun and the painting supplies were never found, and the suicide story presented other problems, beginning with the distance from the Wheatfields to the Ravoux Inn, about a mile or more. It would have been a long hike over rough terrain for a badly wounded man.
How did he climb through these vast wheat fields and down the escarpment into the town? It's a rather difficult journey, and extremely difficult to imagine that in that physical condition he could have made that trip.
The authors believe he didn't. Their research turned up a story handed down through an Auvers family over the years of a man who saw Vincent just before the shooting, not in the wheat fields, but here in town on the Rue Boucher, a street of small houses with enclosed farmyards. Were there any witnesses or people who heard the shot?
Yes, the woman whose grandfather told her the story said that he heard the gunshot in one of these farmyards, and that he later went back and could find no evidence of what had taken place, but he heard the gunshot take place in the farmyard.
And from here, it would have been easier for Vincent to get back to the Auberge Ravoux. He would stagger down the street and then make, what, a left turn?
A left turn towards the Auberge.
And how far is that, roughly?
About a half a mile. So it would have been still a struggle, but less of a struggle than climbing down and around to the wheat fields.
To Naphy and Smith, Auvers yielded more contradictions. In this house lived Paul Gachet, a doctor Vincent saw from time to time and even painted. Dr. Gachet drew this sketch of the artist on his deathbed after examining him. He found the bullet was lodged in Vincent's abdomen, a curious way, it would seem, to attempt suicide.
The doctors told the police that the trajectory of the bullet was at a crazy angle and that the gun was held at a distance from the body and even perhaps too far from the body for Vincent to have actually been holding the gun.
It should be said that there was no, what we would regard today as a forensic investigation.
No, there was no autopsy and no forensic investigation. Just the Auvers police came to Vincent's door and said, "Did you try to commit suicide?" And he said, "I think I did."
I think I did.
I think I did. Isn't that right?
I believe so.
I believe so.
Then he said, "Don't accuse anybody else."
Yeah.
Which is an odd thing to say.
It should be said that much of the evidence is based on personal recollection and rumor. Still, to the writers, an alternate view of Vincent's death was slowly taking shape. Enhanced by this man, the late John Rewald, an eminent art historian. Rewald was in Auvers in the 1930s when many people with first-hand recollections of the Van Gogh affair were still living.
And the rumors that he heard were that Vincent didn't kill himself, that he was shot accidentally by a couple of boys, and that he decided to protect them and play the martyr. That account fit all of the known facts.
And there was a smoking gun of sorts in an obscure French medical journal. Thank you. Thank you very much. We located a copy at the Frick Art Reference Library in New York. It was a 1956 interview with Rene Secretin, a well-to-do French businessman.
This was a guilt-ridden account of how he and his brother, and especially several friends, had gotten to know Vincent that summer.
The teenage Secretin brothers were part of the wave of well-heeled Parisians who descended on Auvers each summer. In the interview, Rene Secretin said they bought Vincent drinks at the Ravoux Inn and teased and taunted him mercilessly.
They put salt in his coffee and chuckled when he spit it up. They put a snake in his paint box and he almost blacked out.
But Vincent always was desperate for company and tagged along as the teenagers did what young people do down by the river.
One of the many ways to taunt him was to kiss and caress their girlfriends in front of him here along the riverbank. And in some cases, they had the girls go over to Vincent and pretend to seduce him, and he felt incredibly uncomfortable.
So it was really tormenting.
It was really tormenting him because he knew that it wasn't genuine. He knew that they were just being put up to this and that they were laughing at him.
Another piece of the puzzle came from the Louvre in Paris, where the authors found this untitled sketch by Vincent. They believe it actually shows Rene Secretin decked out as Buffalo Bill, whose Wild West show was a major hit in Paris just the year before.
Rene was running around Auvers in a rodeo cowboy hat and a fringed jacket and cowboy boots, and with a gun that he had borrowed from Gustave Ravoux. It turns out that the gun had not been loaned to Vincent, but much more credibly had been loaned to this 16-year-old kid.
In the 1956 interview, Rene Secretin does make it clear that he got the pistol from Ravoux, the innkeeper. Secretin was never asked if he was directly involved in Vincent's death, carrying that answer to his grave a year later. He did claim that Vincent stole the gun from him and that he and his brother had left Auvers by the time of the shooting. But Nafy and Smith say that's unlikely. So if it wasn't suicide, what does the evidence point to?
What the evidence points to is that this incident took place not in the wheat fields, but in a farmyard on the Rue Boucher, that it involved these two boys, and that it was either an accident or a deliberate act. Was it playing cowboy in some way that went awry? Was it teasing with the gun, with Vincent lunging out? It's hard to know precisely what went on at that moment.
But the theory could explain Vincent's remark to the police before he died. He said, "Don't accuse anyone else." And it fits the rumors John Rewald heard long ago.
That a couple of kids had shot Vincent Van Gogh, and he decided to basically protect them and accept this as the way to die. These kids had basically done him the favor of shooting him.
He was covering up his own murder.
Covering up his own murder.
However he died, Vincent may have welcomed death. He felt guilty over his dependence on his younger brother Theo, who was in failing health himself.
He knew that he was a burden to Theo. There's something wonderfully sweet about the fact that Vincent would accept death, partly to end his own misery, but even more so to take this terrible burden off of his beloved, ill brother's shoulders.
Before his burial, there was a gathering at the Ravoux Inn to remember Vincent. Sunflowers, of course, and on the walls, some of his Auvers paintings, the wheat fields, the town hall, a portrait of Adeline Ravoux, the teenager who served dinner every night to the troubled man who lived in the tiny room upstairs, the man who once wrote, "As a painter, I will never amount to anything important. I am absolutely sure of it."
The miracle is that this alienated person ended up becoming the most popular artist of all time, so he achieved exactly what he set out to achieve. I mean, he did provide consolation for humanity.